David Bedrick is a teacher, counselor, and attorney. He grew up in a family marked by violence. While his father's brutality was physical and verbal, his mother's denial and gaslighting had its own covert power.
Mhm.
This formative context introduced David early to the etiology of shame and instilled an urge to unshame. Professionally, he was on the faculty for the University of Phoenix and the Process Work Institute in the US and Poland, and is the founder of the Santa Fe Institute for Shame-Based Studies, where he trains therapists, coaches, and healers and offers workshops for individuals to further their own personal development. David writes for Psychology Today and is the author of 3 books, Talking Back to Dr. Phil, Alternatives to Mainstream Psychology, Revisioning Activism, Bringing Depth, Dialogue, and Diversity to Individual and Social Change. You Can't Judge a Body by Its Cover, 17 Women's Stories of Hunger, Body Shame, and Redemption. And then there's the 4th book, which is the newest book, which is The Unshaming Way, which was published by North Atlantic Books in November of last year. So yeah, very, very excited to have you along. And yeah, firstly, how are we finding you today?
Um, this is this is 9 o'clock in the morning, which for me is early. Not I wake up much earlier, but I usually don't talk to people until 10 or 11. So, but I'm happy to be here. Yeah. I'm
Amazing.
moved by your mission and vision and weaving together social identity, I'm going to call
Mm,
it that, and psychology, a needed weaving and effort and care. So thank you for doing that work.
thank you so much. And I guess it brings me to the first question, which is just how, and we touched on this a bit in the bio, but how and why did shame kind of become your life's work?
Yeah. It- it's always two reasons. It's always two reasons. It's always, but it's often two reasons. And a person's story, especially the story of their social identity and personal identity and the trials and tribulations and traumas they've been through, can weave together with a person's gifts. If
Mm,
you're John Coltrane, then you take being African American and having certain talents, and then the saxophone and its playing becomes how you express your love, etc. So for me, I had a story, as you mentioned, of a father, a Jewish father, um, who used fists and belts to express his rage, and then a mother who was disempowered, and that meant
mm,
in denial of what was happening. So it was like, what are you talking about? Even if she saw the violence, like heavy duty violence, I don't want to just trigger people. We can say
mm,
something like that later. Even if she saw that, she'd say, I don't know what happened. That didn't happen. Why are you getting so upset? Maybe you get stomach aches because you're eating badly, right?
mm,
So we call that today gaslighting. So the way she dealt with her disempowerment as a person and as a woman was that. So now
mm,
I take in the violence, obviously, but then I take in her viewpoint, the way she sees it. I'm young, I'm vulnerable. Maybe I am making things up. Is it really that bad? Did it happen that way? You can hear the kind of confusion I'm now expressing. I'm unsure of myself. I'm doubting myself. I'm confused. Maybe I am too dramatic. Why am I so angry all the time? And those
mm,
kind of questions define an identity. And the identity is, what's wrong with me?
mm,
And that shame. So the violence doesn't create the shame, but the way it's witnessed, in this case, it was my mother. It could have been a school system, it could have been a police system, it could have been anything that witnessed. Mother shouldn't be on the hook for that. So I'm not blaming mothers.
mm,
Just in my family, she was the witness, my father was the perpetrator. Mhm.
mm. Well, thank you. Thank you for your vulnerability and
Yeah,
sharing with us. I think
yeah,
it spotlights this idea of having a witness. And
yeah,
something that comes up again and again in your work is this idea of the witness, either having one, but also becoming your own in that process within the therapeutic work. Could you speak to, yeah, the idea of witnessing and what that's meant for
yeah.
you?
So a witness can be one of two things. If a witness denies, dismisses, or gaslights, that means, Cassandra, are you sure? I didn't see that. Oh, come on. Oh, go back to that guy. He would never have hurt you. That's a doctor. Doctors never touch,
Mm,
violate,
mm,
assault their patients. So those kinds of things. Oh, what were you wearing? And why did you do that? Well, that's a militant black person. God, I don't even want to say that out loud. Ah! Okay, somebody has to have a reaction to those things. But
yeah.
Sorry, I have to stop and just pause because I have so much feeling when I say things, some of those things, because they're so
What?
gross. But notice that those are not the perpetrator. Those are how people are talking to the person who's been hurt. This is how I see it. You're a person who shouldn't be wearing certain clothes, who has a certain color, who's,
Mm,
etc., who makes things up, who's psychologically unsound, who's got anger problems. When that witness happens, then shame enters. The person comes to believe those things about themselves, like for me and my mother. But there's something that I call an unshaming witness. And the
mm,
unshaming witness sees what says, oh, I just saw that. Or you told me a story about what happened. I have no reason not to believe
yep.
you and believe in you, thinking, oh, something happened. It's important that you tell me. It would be good if I have a feeling for you, like a
Mm,
human. Like if you were hurt, it would be good if I was either pissed
mm,
or oh, Cassandra, oh my, or touched. So if I have a feeling reaction, that gets into you kind of go, oh, I must matter. David's actually moved by what I said. He's upset about what's happening for me. David sees it. He's not ignoring the details. Oh, he
mm,
believes me. And when those kind of things happen, the belief, the seeing, the feeling, people take in the opposite of shame, the opposite of what's wrong with me. Oh, nothing's wrong with me. I was injured. Oh, yeah, thank you. I believe myself. I believe my experience. And that creates a whole different psyche. And it changes the healing industry dramatically because the
mm,
healing industry psychologically is mostly based on an allopathic model. Allopathic means you come in with a symptom, I'm angry. And then I say, oh, you got anger issues. Let me help you with your anger. And I
mm,
don't find out the meaning of that anger, where it belongs, the power in that anger that you need. I don't believe in it. I just
mm,
think, what's wrong with you? Oh, I procrastinate. What's wrong with you? Oh, I drink too many drinks at night. What's wrong with you? Doesn't mean I should support you to drink too many drinks,
mhm,
but I don't think this person is doing something important and witness it as if there is intelligence in your system
mm,
that is expressing itself about a story and about who you are and the kind of nature and responses you have to the world.
mm.
Yeah.
There's so much in that. And I guess I feel like landing on that last point of there's an intelligence in
Yes.
what's showing up. And I
Yes.
guess the trusting of that and how that makes such a difference, leaning into saying, I trust your experience and how it's manifesting in the world rather than there's something wrong with you. And I guess, you've written about activism, you've written about kind of the political. I mean, in the Unshaming Way, there's a whole chapter on social issues and shame.
Yes. Yes.
And how do you see, I guess, this individual experience of shame either manifesting relationally or on a sort of systems level? Like, it's a big question, but
Yes.
yeah, how do you see it?
Well, so in my example, I had a mother who was a witness, and she wasn't the only witness, meaning she saw or didn't see, or somebody I told. A witness could be somebody I told 20 years ago,
Mm,
right? Or 20 years later, already, or 200 years later, actually.
mm,
So, so socially, we need a culture that has a sufficient percentage of people who can bear witness to the violence. It's not going to be everyone. It's not going to be 50% of the people. It's
mm,
going to be probably closer to 5 to 10%. I don't have research on that. That's my
yeah.
opinion. From it's an educated opinion, but it's an opinion. I don't have numbers, but it's probably like 5% of the people who we need to witness social violence. So if somebody attacks you, says, Cassandra, don't take anything. You're an idiot. I can't believe you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I could witness that in personally. Oh my gosh, that's gross. That person said that to you. But I could also witness the social aspect. Did that come across also as sexist? Did you feel that particularly as a woman? Does that person do that to other women? Have you had similar comments that come to you as a woman versus the man who you work with?
Hmm.
And if those kinds, and you could say, no, it's nothing to do with that. I trust you for that moment. Maybe your sister should tell you different about that. I would say, then I believe you. But most women would say, oh, that never happens to these people. That always happens to me. Of course, it has to do with being a woman. So in that case, the assault on you is not just to your intelligence, meaning you're one more person whose intelligence is impugned. It's to you as a woman person. Your gendered identity is also assaulted. So that means I need to witness two things. The individual assault, that's gross that a person puts you down like that in public, let's say.
Hmm.
And what's it like for you to get that kind of attack on your intelligence as a woman. I want to witness that part
Mm,
also. And you might say, well, individually, I hate it. Da, da, da. As a woman, David, it's crushing. This is what happens to me. I don't have a voice. I don't speak up in the world in general. So
mm,
now you're telling me other aspects that have to do with your woman's body and identity. I'm assuming
mm.
you're has a woman identity. Thank you. I just want to check with
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Thank you.
So if that's happening, then I want to witness that so that something in you takes in. This was somebody cares about the assault that I just experienced.
Mm,
And someone's like, oh my gosh, thank you for doing that. As a woman, that's really important. Or maybe as a woman, no one's ever done that with you
yeah.
before. And you kind of go, whoa, really? That's relevant as a woman? I'm like, you should read this, you should read that, you should talk to these other women. Let me tell you the stories I've heard, because I don't have that experience as a man, but let me tell you the stories I've heard that women have brought to me. Now, witnessing the gender aspect of that becomes really important.
Uh-huh. And so I guess in this it
Mhm.
becomes twofold. There's like the witnessing of the, I guess, individualistic injury, the like one-to-one, you saying,
Yes,
Cassandra, you're gross, etc. But then you
yes,
add this like, yeah, other layer of witnessing, which
yeah,
is the, yeah, intersectional dynamics that go on just existing in the world.
that's right.
And have you found in your, I guess, clinical experience that almost double whammy, if you will, the sort of individual, personal, do you differentiate the two like I just did, or would you say it's the same thing?
I would differentiate.
Hmm.
Yes, I
Say
would
more on
differentiate.
that.
You're saying differentiate between the individual
Yep,
violence. Yes,
kind of.
here's one of the places it become it's important in many ways.
Mm,
But if I was working with an individual, right, if you would come to me and we were talking about that, I'd be thinking about and concerned about how you have internalized that witnessing.
mm,
Because if you internalize that as I'm dumb, I'm stupid, that would be pretty bad, right? And then let's say now you walk around with that voice that says, I'm this, I shouldn't speak up, I should just hold my tongue and other people know better than me. That
yeah.
would disempower your voice. If you internalize that as a woman, you now have an extra thing. You have this thing of, I'm not, I don't even want to say these words out loud, but people understand. I'm not a smart woman.
Yeah.
Women are like that. And now you have what people would call internalized oppression.
Mm,
Means it's not just the voice of one jerk who put you down. It's the voice of a culture. So now the power of that insult is not David saying, Cassandra, you're this
mhm,
or that. You have a whole culture and a power that's been for generations. That's not a 50-pound punch. That's a 10 million pound punch. So
mm,
it has a lot of energy behind it. And then you're going to think, why do I still think this? Why do I still think this? Then I would say, Cassandra, that's been hundreds or more years and a whole culture that reinforces this message for you as a woman. And every time you look in the mirror, put on a clothes, or think of yourself as a woman in any way, that message is reinforced. That's not just that one person who put you
yeah.
down you can't get over. Oh, really? No. Don't think something's wrong with you that you can't get over that. That's an incredible force. And the medicine you might need is different. You might need solidarity with other women who get that. You might need to read bell hooks or other
Mm,
feminist psychologists. You may need to connect with women who get that so you can connect with why it's bad to be put down and what that's like as a woman in your body and your identity walking through the world. Both of those healings are needed. And
mm,
if you get both of those healings, that social healing, I'm calling it, that means you wake up to the social oppression, how it's been internalized. You feel more empowered as a woman to have boundaries and not think of yourself as intelligent. You will also not just heal yourself, you will be a healing power, medicine for other people, whether that's men by correcting me and
mm,
say, and then you're medicine for me, whether I take it in or not. And you're like, that's how I learned a lot. A lot of women people of color said, David, let me tell you why that's insulting. Well, they told me in a harsher way that was less friendly. So, but that's still medicine, meaning a
mm,
corrective to my eyes, or another woman who's not as far along as you. You kind that you so it's no longer only in the individual healing
mhm.
space, it's a
Yeah.
collective healing space.
Yeah, so important. And actually, as you were talking, there was this. paragraph in that chapter that I'm just going
Yeah,
to read out loud because I think it
please.
speaks to exactly what you're saying. And then you've sparked another question off the back of that. So I'm going to read this. If you want to respond to it, please do. And then I'm going to ask the next question, which came to mind right at the end there.
Great.
So what you say in this book is how people dialogue about social violence, forms of social oppression, and marginalization is a window into the stories we tell ourselves about our nation,
Yeah.
illuminating how we shame or unshame the oppressed. These narratives either help us to face ourselves and bring about change, or they chain us to the unjust systems and dehumanizing practices of the past. Is there anything you kind of want to say to that point?
Today's Friday. I think it was yesterday.
Mm.
Um, in the United States, there was a plane that crashed, a plane and a helicopter crash. I don't know who crashed into a plane and a helicopter crash. There was 64 people on the plane. They all died, and three people, I think, on the helicopter, and they all died. I'm moving fast not to dismiss that.
Mhm.
Normal problems, we can stop and kind of go, holy shit, and we could have grief or anger or think all the appropriate emotions
Yeah.
uh, that go with that. But then our new president, Donald Trump, and I don't want to get into Trump is a no good person. Let's all real. That's not my point here.
Sure.
He's a stand-in for something.
Yep.
And his first response was to say, we have, I'm not going to get his words perfectly, but I'm going to get the exact meaning. We have a diversity and inclusion program, and that's the cause of these kinds of things because then we don't take people. These things are so freaking gross. It's hard to say them and not want to like scream.
Mm.
It's important because we shouldn't take them in without a
A
feeling reaction
reaction.
to it. It's like otherwise we don't witness how gross it is. And then when we have these diversity hires, we have people who are don't have the intelligence or psychological wellness. I can't believe he used
Mm.
intelligence, genius, and psychological health.
Wow.
So, whoa. Now some people will think, well, maybe they weren't smart, but that's not. He's
Mm.
witnessing the violence. The violence was the plane crashing and whoever was responsible for that.
Sure.
But he's witnessing that and he's saying, hey, people, you should be thinking about makes me weep again, some person, a woman person, a person of color who's not so smart,
Mm.
psychologically unwell, unstable. Isn't that awkward? You should have that in your mind now
Mm.
when you think about these things.
Mm.
About these speak things. It's like that goes over the airwaves and it's relatively, not relatively, a large majority of people would say that's true.
Mm.
They wouldn't even, not only, they wouldn't even, they would say, well, David, you don't want to hire people who are bad. And they wouldn't get that he's witnessing the violence. He didn't, when he was asked, he didn't know who did it, what the color was, what the gender, he didn't know anything about that. So he now bearing witness and saying, please put into your mind a certain kind of person.
Mm.
Please connect that person with less intelligence and less psychological wellness. That's the basis of caste systems.
Mm.
The basic essence in India, in Nazi Germany, in the United States, a system says these are people of lesser value, lesser rank, lesser humanity. It's
Mm.
that potent. So,
Mm.
anyway, I get so upset I'm going to lose track of it.
No.
This is the kind of stuff that, again, he's not the perpetrator of the initial violence, but
Mm.
he's saying, here's how I see it. That is incredibly, that to me, that's the shaming part. That's if in this case, dehumanization as a form of
Mm-hmm.
shame. That to me is more dangerous. Not that we should overlook the violence of the mistakes or people getting hurt,
Sure.
but when that kind of idea perpetrates people's consciousness, it allows incredible amount of things to happen
Mm.
to millions of people over hundreds of years. It allows that to happen. So that's why I focus less on perpetrators. Trump is a bad dude. Da, 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 he did this, or this person assaulted somebody on the train, and this police officer assaulted a person and search and frisked a person of color and shouldn't. That's a bad police officer. I don't focus on that police officer. And somebody should. They should
Mm-hmm.
prosecute that person, etc. I focus on that's a system, everybody. that bears witness to people in a certain way. And if we think that's okay to do, because if the system was different, that person would have got lost their job
Mm.
or more. So it's the systemic witnessing that creates the problem. The individual is a bad apple, let's get rid of them. But that doesn't create the witnessing of all those particular events. I'm not saying that clearly. Is that you can come
Yes.
back
Yeah, yeah. No, no, no. It's spot on. And I mean, what a apt and sort of timely example of this kind of playing out in real time, sort of
yeah.
mass dehumanization, that we're sort of seeing again and again anytime you turn the TV on at the moment.
Right.
And
And then somebody's going to try to find, well, this was the person and they're bad. Let's prosecute that person who are drinking. I don't know. I'm making something up. I have no idea
yep,
what they're drinking on the job or whatever they were.
yep.
And then everyone will focus on, yeah, that person, let's get that person. But then we'll forget this whole systemic view that's been brought out into the world. And it injures people because
Mm,
if you're a person who feels looked at as having less intelligence, less psychological wellness, like people of color, like women have
mm,
across time, that can injure and that could go in. And you could start thinking of yourself that way.
mm.
People do. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead. Go back to
Oh
your
no.
question also.
No,
Yeah.
people absolutely do. And you carry it, right? And we carry it. I mean, I can only speak to this as a woman, but you carry that the impact of the dehumanization, the feeling less than, etc. You have that in your backpack, right? You carry it around with you all the time. And
97%, there's a study done, 97% of women have violent voices inside of themselves about their body every day. Not just like you, those
one.
glasses are not as nice as this. I
Mm,
mean, disgusting, ugly, nasty voices every day.
mm,
Now,
yeah.
somebody can say, well, maybe people don't feel as good about how they look. Here's more research. If you think of yourself as, if you take that in, I'm not attractive, I'm not beautiful, and whatever, and all the other things that go in, I'm not lovable, you are less likely to speak up. You're less likely to find the right kind of person. You're less likely to set boundaries with people who are abusive to you. You're
Yeah.
less likely to express your intelligence. You're less likely to be able to focus on reading a book because it's hard to focus when you feel that bad about yourself. So it's
Yeah.
not just, well, some people don't feel good about their beauty. The impact on that life, how
Mm,
they parent, how your mother will change. So
yeah.
it's not just like a little thing, not that feeling ugly
Yeah,
and
yeah.
unattractive is
Yeah.
small. It impacts the whole flow of the life. Yeah.
The flow of the life and the flow of the system, right? And
Yeah.
if I think if we think about it in that way, it's we're all a bunch of individuals in this system. So if we're all walking around carrying this burden of shame, and that's influencing how we connect or don't connect with each other,
Yeah.
oftentimes don't connect, right? As a result of shame, it goes inward.
Yes. Yeah, go
And
inward,
so,
isolate. I don't know. I'm just depressed. I don't know. I'm just feeling a lot. Some people come to, I'm just very anxious. I'm just depressed.
mhm,
I have anger issues, so it's hard for me to be in public.
yeah.
All those people could just have a lot of internalized depression and having a reason, if you're being told you're no good, etc. Of course you're depressed. Of course you're angry. Of course you're afraid that you're anxious. That's not
Mhm,
an anxiety problem, a depression problem, an anger problem. That's an internalized oppression problem.
mm,
And if
mm,
we diagnose it as the other, if we diagnose it as a depression problem, not that you shouldn't get help and maybe drugs will save
yeah,
your life, I'm not against that. But if we don't inquire further and see, oh, of course you feel down and want to lay in bed and don't do anything because of
yeah,
how you're treated inside, then we don't bear witness.
yes.
Going back to the gender, race, neurodiversity,
What?
Muslim problem, we don't bear witness to that. That goes underground, and we just think there's a whole bunch of people who are depressed.
Mm,
There's a whole bunch of Native Americans who have alcohol problems. You
mhm,
want to say these things out loud. And
mhm,
if we can say that without looking at
mm,
what's going on, what is that condition,
yeah, yeah.
then we don't witness that. We just think, well, that's a drunk whatever person on the street, and we don't have to include that in our consciousness.
Mm,
And that becomes very painful. Yeah.
yeah, I think that sort of numbing or, cutting off from the, I guess, compassion or the ability to witness is
Yeah.
something that's really interesting. I guess politically, does shame have a function politically, do you think?
Say more about what you're thinking.
So I guess in terms of like, if we're all conditioned or socialized to be walking around not bearing witness to each other, whether it's because
Yeah.
of our own shame or whatever reason, but this is how we're being socialized.
Yeah.
Do you think there's political benefits to us being in a shame state or not witnessing each other's shame?
Not witnessing, you're saying.
Mm,
I mean, if we're not witnessing, then it allows
mm,
systems of oppression, more fascistic systems, to thrive.
mm,
It allows that to happen. We know that in all kinds of cultures. As a Jewish person, I'm probably more likely to have studied um, the rise of anti-Semitism over centuries, and
mhm.
it's flowering. Is that it's flowering in Nazi Germany, how that happens. And
Yeah.
people say, that's a bad person, that's a this, that's a that, and then that's an economic problem. And then it's easy to
Mm,
leave out why did a specific group of people, well, Jews, queer folks, people who were not mentally considered the same, gypsies. So why those targets though? Well, people
mm,
are screwed up in there. They say people who hurt people. So let's say that's why Germany got hurt. They got crushed in World War One. But this could happen to any group. Those people are suffering. Those people are hurt. Those people have a lot of fear. All those statements leave out the identity of the people who are hurt.
mm,
I can be afraid and go fight with my father. It doesn't have to be fight with my wife because she's a weaker physical force. Does it make sense? So
mhm,
if we make psychological analysis that leave out the identity of those people who are harmed, then the psychological analysis breeds shame. Then
mm,
why Jews? Why gypsies? Why women? Why Muslims? Why Palestinians? And we should ask those questions. Otherwise, again, the psychological analysis leaves things out. So politically, it allows gross things to happen and fascistic things to happen, um, and maintains systems. I'm not sure politically how much those. I'm not as hopeful as some around political systems
mm,
of like electoral systems being the most helpful place. But some people do. I wanted uh, Kamala Harris to become president, and it wasn't because I thought she's just a great candidate, and then that's a whole nother question. But part of it is I don't like the fascist movement of the country. But
mm,
part of it is I think in my mind, I wonder what some girl of color seeing her, maybe that will affect her life,
mm.
independent of her policies. That's not the whole reason, but that is in my mind,
Yeah.
thinking somebody looks at her and sees that could be me. That's one part. I'm not saying that should be an entire decision, but that's not irrelevant to me that someone gets to look and see that person and say, that looks like me.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, representation.
Yeah.
Yeah, being
Represent
able
me.
to look to positions of power, privilege, and see yourself reflected there.
Isn't that huge?
Mm,
Years ago, I went to a photography exhibit. It was called, oh, I can't remember it. It was a really famous one, and it had picture. There were huge pictures, like 5 by 10 size, life-size pictures of African American firsts, the first African American opera singer, the first African American mayor, etc. And then one of them was the first African American female brain surgeon. They had her in her like a surgical garb, the mask down and a thing on her hair. And this is more like 40 years ago. And I
mm,
looked at the image and I fell to my knees and started sobbing. And my friend said, "Why are you crying?" I said, "I didn't know. I never saw that. It
mm.
never even occurred to me that I didn't know.
Yeah.
I saw that, and it was so different from what I had in my brain
Mm,
that she was absent from my consciousness, a
mm,
hole where I didn't even know existed. And then I see, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm like, her?
mm.
Like my brain
Yeah.
is like having to deal with the discord,
Mm,
the dissonance of something in me doesn't have that image. And now I'm
No, you
having,
do.
I'm being confronted with that image. It was so powerful. Uh,
Mm,
yeah. So you're talking
thank
about
you.
representation.
Yeah.
I left your political question, but just,
No, no.
yeah,
It's hugely important, and I guess you spoke about that experience with such humility just then. I guess naming your own sort of blinkered spots or the spots that,
yeah,
you know, how have you come to learn to do that within yourself? Kind of naming your own, I guess, things
yeah,
that you haven't been able to, you know,
yeah.
blinkered spots.
I mean, there's a few reasons. One is always a person's nature, because some people are not inclined to ever wake up about certain things. They're just not. I'm not trying to put them down or say we should accept that. It's just, it's just true. So something in me, for whatever reason, took the violence that I experienced and wanted to not have that happen to other people, especially the violence that my mother perpetrated, which is the
Mm,
shaming. Some part of me was like, I didn't want people to be told something's not happening. For some reason, I focused on that.
mm,
Why, I don't know. That was in me. So I had an inclination in that way. Um, some of my greatest teachers were African American teachers. My favorite teacher is this K.
mm,
James Baldwin. I've had his picture on my desk for 30 years. I read the letter that he wrote to his nephew
mm,
many years ago, and I don't know how many times I read it. I'm shy to say I read it as if he was writing to me. I'm not a 15-year-old black youth in Harlem and wasn't, but somehow I needed to hear somebody talk to me the way he talked to me.
mm,
So
mm,
um so that became relevant. Um yeah, I've been lucky also to have people challenge me, you know,
mm,
with
mhm,
some love not meaning I shouldn't feel bad or something, but enough love to yeah,
mm.
challenge me. Yeah. Some
That,
people some
oh,
people have also helped me wake up about my my own experiences as an individual, but my own experience as a Jewish person.
mm,
Uh, I remember I had a psychologist, Max Schupak, a Swiss psychologist I worked with for many years, a brilliant man. I used to call him a sorcerer because he was kind of magical, more than psychological. And I remember telling him the story about my father's violence,
mm,
uh, and what I grew up with. And Max had tears in his eyes. And I said, "You're really moved by what I went through." And he said, "I am, but that's not why I'm crying." And I said, "Why are you crying?" And he said, "Because I'm Swiss. And maybe if the Swiss were different, your Jewish father would have been different." What?
mm,
I'm like, no one ever said anything like that to me ever. He wasn't feeling like I'm bad, I'm guilty. He's not like, oh, I'm a terrible person. He
yeah.
really felt the implication of the absence of Swiss witness.
Uh-huh.
And we're neutral. He's like, no, no, no. That was so deep a medicine for me.
Mm,
And that wasn't, I like psychology, working on traumas, working in psychology,
mm,
but that's a social witnessing. He says, I'm seeing you and your father as also a Jewish story. And I can witness that by saying, maybe your father would have been different. I, as a Swiss person, have something to do with that story personally. That blew my mind. Yeah.
I mean,
That's not
yeah,
that's not
I'm
heard of in psychology. Go
no, no,
ahead.
no. Yeah, I'm sitting here affected by that. Just how that angle is so rarely brought to like traditional sort of healing spaces.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the big reasons I'm asking about kind of your humility is I'm
Oh,
thinking about, you know, something violent has occurred, whether interpersonally within your community, something's happened. And maybe one of us wants to be a witness and kind of name it or call it out or actually call in. I'm wondering, is there a way to be calling each other in that I don't know if you could totally avoid shame, but does it in a way that brings people towards the cause or violence you're trying to name?
it's
Or,
such, it's such a good question.
mm,
It's such an important. I don't have an answer.
mhm,
It's such an important question. What do we do to raise that consciousness, to
Mhm.
whatever we're going to call it, alert people so they can see things that they are not able to see or don't want to see? I mean, the first thing I would say is if you as a person are have a reaction, find places where you don't mute that reaction.
Mhm.
Meaning that really upsets me, but I don't want to say things that are going to be too difficult. Then find some other place, but don't suppress those strong reactions so that you're not upsetting to other people. That's not good for the whole story. Doesn't mean you're going to do it in the best way for that other person's learning. And maybe you can't even do it that. Maybe I want to kill somebody and I'm not going to go do that. But then I'm going to go into my room and I'm going to express the rage that I have. I'm going to call quote unquote murderous rage. I'm not going to go get a gun. I don't want to take a person's life. I don't want to be responsible for taking a person's
Mhm.
life. But the energies that live in us, those need to be unshamed, alive, meaningful. Make poems out of it. Make talk to other friends that you do something with that energy. Make music out of it. Set boundaries with your children with it. I don't know, but do something with that energy. Don't suppress it and make those into bad things. Because some people are try to be so careful with
Mhm.
not making another person upset. We know that they lose voice, and that's not usually good for their life. Um,
Mhm.
if it's possible, when a person injures another person, if it's possible, asking that person, what was it like to be you doing that? That's the most neutral question. Now I'm not in I want to hurt you, because if I want to hurt you, I can't honestly ask you that question. I want to say, I want to hurt you. I won't do it, but I want to hurt you back. I want to do this. I want to
Mhm.
confront you. I want you to change. I'm in pain. I want to scream and cry about what you've done. All of those things belong. But if I can witness that separately, that means you just said to this person, or used your fists, or used your belts, or whatever, shot this person or pulled that person over. What's it like to do that? And that
Mhm.
person won't know the answer because they've never had to inquire about the deeper experience.
Mhm.
What's it like is a huge thing. Well, I just felt like I can do that. What's it like to feel like you can do whatever you want?
Mhm.
That's not a guilt question. What's it like?
Mhm.
And then person has to feel something of that. I remember once I was teaching a class at University of Phoenix, and we were talking about different kinds of privileges. I called it rank, different kinds of privileges. And I'm about 5'7", and the guy I was talking to was about 6'4". And I'm using American metric, I realize.
No.
Um, and he said, I don't understand. I said, stand up. And I stood up next to him. So he was, 9, 10 inches taller than me. And I stood very close to him. And I said, what's it like to be taller than me?
Mhm.
And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, you're looking down, right? I'm looking up.
Mhm.
What's that like? That was really hard for him and he's experiencing it all the time, but I'm not putting him down. He's not conscious of that experience.
Mhm.
Feel what it's like looking down, having other people look up. Let it into your body. Feel what it's like. Maybe you want to stand up, not crouch down. Maybe it feels good walking around like that. That person needs to know what it's like, not as a put down, but to feel that kind of the height privilege. A person needs to know what it's like to feel that way. And privilege, I call that rank because my teacher, Arnie Mindell, called it rank, the power difference.
Mhm.
Um, a person who has more of that is almost always somewhat unconscious. Everybody about that. Arnie Mindell said, rank is a drug.
Mhm.
That means I feel really good right now. I don't think I'm getting something, 20 people fawning over me, right? I'm not noticing that part of the rank, right? I'm power difference. People are trying to be nice because they're frightened of me. I'm not thinking that.
Mhm.
Oh, and I could be aware of that, but it's less likely. I might just be, I'm calling it quote unquote drunk. This feels really good. I like feeling this way about myself. This is lovely. I don't know. I just had a great time in that class. I was a brilliant teacher. You feel part of that because you're really smart, David, but you feel part of that because of the way people are looking at you.
Mhm.
Creates an atmosphere. Really? I didn't know. So waking people up to that experience.
mm,
is huge. It's
mm.
huge. Yeah.
Waking up to the, yeah, your own, the privileges we all hold to
Yeah.
some varying rank.
Yeah.
And
What's it like
it's,
to be bigger than a person? What's it like to be more educated than a
yeah.
person? What's it like the the specific part? What's it like when you're a teacher and a student? What's it like that being the teacher person, not like you, David, the person, or on
Mhm.
the sofa? What's it like to be the teacher person? I don't know. I'm just talking to Cassandra, my student.
Mhm.
Oh, you don't notice that you're the teacher person and that person is treating you in a certain way given that role, probably, not maybe not, but probably, and you're experiencing something that's not just David. You're experiencing
Mhm.
this thing that comes from people treating you as a higher, more authority human being.
Mm. Yeah, the
This is why,
position is like laden with meaning.
yeah,
Like
yeah, it's
intrinsic.
laden with meaning, and people then project what's it like walking around more or less white, more or less straight as I am
Mm.
in the world. I don't know. I'm David.
Yeah.
Can you follow? And what that means is I have the luxury, people call that privilege, of not thinking of myself as a skin color or a gender. That's
Mm.
why I say David,
Mm.
right? Because if you were black and queer, you might say, well, as a black and queer person, but David doesn't say as a white male person.
Mm.
David says as David.
Mm.
Makes sense? So I don't have to have consciousness about my identity. That is the experience.
Mm. Mm.
And that has a feeling experience in the body to have that. I don't have to think about those things. That's an experience I don't notice because it's everywhere. Yeah.
Mm. Such a such a useful way to put it. And that, wanting to kind of bring each other in and be connected, I guess, for a cause, for a purpose, etc. Do you think there needs to be an existing sort of relationship to do that kind of calling in or curious? Maybe I'm going to leave that term aside, calling in. What you've described to me is like a genuine curiosity of the other person and their
Yeah.
experience. So, do you think there needs to be an existing relationship for that sort of curiosity to happen?
There has to be some kind of, I'm going to call it consent, but that's too strong a word,
Mm-hmm.
meaning a consent even to be in the conversation. That person have to say, I agree to have this conversation. But if a person's staying in the conversation, right? If a person writes to me on social media and keeps on writing back, they are consenting to converse with me. It's
Mm-hmm.
on social media. They could walk away. They're not locked up in, right?
Yeah,
They
yeah,
could
yeah.
kind of go. So there's an implied consent to have a dialogue,
Mm,
particular thing. I'm using the word consent in that
yeah,
way
yeah.
because if the person essentially doesn't consent internally, I don't want to be here. If I were free, I wouldn't be here. The conversation is going to go nowhere.
Mm,
If that person were more free to be themselves, which is where we have to go first, that person
mm,
would not listen. And
mm,
then I would say to that person, don't listen. I really would.
yeah.
If you would say, what do I do if this person doesn't listen? I would say, treat them like accept that they don't listen. And what do I do with the fact that I'm upset? Find another person who might listen to that and tell them the message. Write a book about it. Do something with it because that's not going to go anywhere. I would even protect that person's freedom to walk away from you.
Mm,
They said, I don't want to be around Cassandra. I'd say, you can leave. I
mm,
really would. Because that's how it's going to go anyway. Not because I think it's right. That's when life continues its way, that person's going to wander away from you and
mm,
you'll have energy left. Let's make that happen as soon as possible. And then you can say, what should I do with all this energy? And I said, let's figure that out.
mm, mm.
Make a podcast
Handling. Yeah,
and use
yeah,
an example and use your example. That's what, or something like that. Let's do something with it.
yeah.
Yeah.
An active process. And I'm aware of the time, and I mean
You
there's
ask great questions, and I have a little self-conscious because I get so I'm passionate about the things
why.
you're bringing up, and they matter to me a lot. So I know I'm like, "Ugh," but that's what comes up for me in talking about these issues. So yeah,
No, no, me too. And I'm just, yeah, so grateful. There is two questions that I have on my
yeah,
mind if you have
let's
time
let,
for it.
let's do them. Yeah,
So the first was around do you think there is a positive role for shame? And I had an example, and again, I'm bringing this person up not as a let's all point fingers
Yeah,
and whatever, but say Elon Musk, right?
yeah,
This person's moving through the world, incredibly violent, etc.
yeah.
Would the shame potentially help him act in more sort of socially just
Yeah.
ways or not?
This question requires a little bit of background.
Mm-hmm.
Way people most people conventionally have thought about shame was a moral idea that came from Judeo-Christian thinking.
Mm-hmm.
You should be ashamed of yourself because you really did something bad.
Mm-hmm.
Although, we can discuss whether that was what happened in the Bible and sexism. But let's say you really did. You injured a community, you injured a child or something like that. You should really, there are certain things you should feel really bad about. And that idea crept in. So that was not a psychological idea, it was a moral notion.
Mm-hmm.
And when psychology started messing around with this idea of shame and researching, then they found out, you know what? Most of the people we're working with, in fact, all the studies were showing this shame thing doesn't is hurting people. It's making people feel worse. It's not helping their psychology. It's not helping them healing.
Mm-hmm.
And then people with the moral idea said, we have to hold on to this. Shame should is a good thing for certain people. So then psychology uh, defaulted and they said, well, let's make it into two kinds, toxic and untoxic.
Uh-huh.
That was a confusion. And that distinction should never, in my opinion, now, this is my opinion, but obviously because I'm speaking, but that distinction muddies the water.
Mm,
There's no good shame. Shame is not a feeling about yourself. Shame is an internalized viewpoint, and that viewpoint annihilates your connection with yourself.
mm,
And if your connection with yourself is less, you will be less empathic, less compassionate, less accountable, less responsible. So I always say to people, should people be accountable? Yes. Responsible? Yes. Remorse? Yes. Make amends? Yes. Should you want to get justice? Yes. Is it fair to want to hurt a person who hurt you back? Yes. That
mm.
comes up as it's a normal human reaction,
Yeah.
right? If I
Yeah.
hurt that person, I want to get justice. They should feel guilty. They should feel terrible about what they did. I think all that's fine. But shame as a literal variable, I look at myself and try to figure out what's wrong with me, disconnects me from the other person. I no longer notice you as
Mm,
all I'm wrapped up in. If I'm trying to make a change because I feel shame, Cassandra, you are invisible to me. Your gender, your personhood, the injury I caused are all irrelevant to me. The only thing that's relevant is how do I get myself out of this bad feeling?
uh-huh.
It doesn't go anywhere. And people can show a lot of remorse and make zero change based on shame.
Mm,
Yeah, there's a man named Jerry Firkenstadt, and I think he's the world's foremost person on working with um, sexual predators. And it's a heavy topic, but
mm.
just say that because
Yeah, it's
people are
okay.
triggered
It's
by
okay.
those things. And he goes around the world working with clinicians and helping them know how to work with these people. Many of
Mm,
them were in jail, and he goes to court, and the court says, "Should we let this person out of jail?" They ask him to make his opinion, and he says, "A person who sits and weeps about how painful what it is what they did," he said, "that person, don't never let them out."
mm,
He said, "That means nothing. It means they have a part of them that feels, but the part of them that perpetrates has nothing to do with that. You
mm,
haven't met the perpetrator." He said, and the clinicians sit and they kind of go, "Oh my gosh, you feel so terrible. Oh, I'm so glad." And he says, he says to those clinicians, you have to talk to the person who thinks about it, who's thought about it 6 months before, who didn't do it accidentally, who plans it, who has the
mm,
impulse, who wants certain things, who has certain needs and knows all that. He said, and the person I would let out of jail says, didn't just happen that day and I lost control. I've been planning this for 6 months. This is
mm,
my fantasy life. This is my imagination life. This is the depth of the needs I have. This is the story that lives in me. He said a person can recount with awareness, not with I'm a bad person. This is
mm.
what I'm up against. This is the kind of things that I do. He said that person is much safer, meaning he's an unshaming witness. Not that doesn't mean everybody don't feel bad. It
Yeah.
means let's get to know the depths of who you are. I'm sorry is not doesn't mean you know anything about yourself or the other person. So yeah, it's a strong example, but
No, no, but really important because I think it's speaking to that thing of like we need to go towards the actual dark experience rather than just what's on the, the weeping that's at the end, right?
That's
Like it's
right.
what are you actually sitting with? What is it like to sit with
Yes.
planning and fantasy and thoughts, etc., right? In this context.
Exactly. I worked with a man
Mhm.
who shook his child.
Yeah.
Got freaked out. He came to me. He's like, oh shit. I'm like, yeah. And then he feels really bad. I'm glad he feels bad about that. That's a good thing. He's suffering about that. That means some compassion and remorse and love for the other person and empathy. All those things are active. That's good. And then I put like a pillow in his hand, you see, and I say, show me what you did. I'm not trying to say, show me what you did.
Mm,
Makes me weep. Let's get to know what's going on for you.
mm,
Does that make sense? I'm not supporting him to do that. The child's not there. The
yeah.
child is now safe. In fact, if he gets more aware of what he's doing, the child's going to be much more safe than if we say, you're a bad person, never do that again.
Yeah.
You have to count on his suppression.
Mm,
Counting
mm,
on people's suppression is not so good. I want to count on the fact that he knows who he is and what that
mm,
energy belongs and what he's going to do with that. And that
mm,
means he's got to show me some of that energy. Hmm.
mm,
Yeah.
mm,
And what's happening inside of him, what he wants to do with that. He's not only a bad dude, but he has that energy. We have to figure out what are you going to do with that that lives inside of you?
mm,
Does it
mm,
belong anywhere else? Do you sit and deal with your child way too long and then finally lose it? How come you don't use a little right away?
mm, mm.
Well, a little doesn't mean shake them, right? It
Yeah.
means stop. I'm walking away. Anyway, there's an intelligence in the system. It's just totally misused, and partially shame is the problem because you're not allowed to do certain things. Then
Suppressed.
you express them in places that are usually not so good.
Yeah, knowing what we're capable of. Knowing what we're
Yeah.
capable of.
Isn't that incredible? Knowing what you're
Mm,
capable. That's a great way of saying it.
mm.
Yeah.
And there's so much more that we could explore and talk about, but I
You had
think
one more question. Let's see if we can get it.
yeah. So, you wrote this book on activism specifically, and I guess in a quite lighthearted, I'm just curious what drew you to writing it. Why did you write it? What was the hope?
The Unshaming Way or the earlier book?
Either, but specifically about the activism, I think.
What drew me to write about it? I mean, it's all the things we're talking about.
Yeah.
The psychology being too often, psychology is more Western, white, and male. I'm not trying to say those are all the bad categories. Whiteness is bad. I'm saying that's where it came from. That's its root.
Mm,
Right. So, and that means that there's a privilege, and the privilege is I think of Cassandra as Cassandra and David as David, and I don't say, I wonder what her background is. I don't know. Yeah, her name is Cassandra. I wonder what that is. If that has something to do with how she feels and experiences things. Oh, she's a woman. I wonder how she experiences things. I don't have to do that. I just think of you as a person, and psychology has had that blind spot. The
mm,
depressed person is a depressed person. So I look at the manual and it says depression means these and these things, right? Anxiety is anxiety. If you look up um, uh, in if you searched under anxiety, then you would get pages and pages of things to do about anxiety.
mm,
But those could be really good. This is how to meditate. This is how to deep breathe. This is how to do things. And you would have to go a lot of pages before you found out about the morbidity rate of Native American children.
mm,
Why do I mention that? Because that person's anxiety, I'm saying it right, that person's anxiety is not the same as David's anxiety.
mm,
That person is more likely to lose a child.
mm,
So, isn't that incredible? So that detail is invisible to the psychological world because they think we're just dealing with anxiety problems.
mm,
That's one example. It wouldn't have to, it could be other examples,
mm,
right? It could be a person with chronic illness. That would be huge. Tons of people with chronic illness experience all kinds of symptoms that are psychological, anxieties, uh, procrastinations, whatever they're going to call it. And then we're going to treat it like that person's procrastinating. But that
mm,
person's in physical pain, ongoing and exhausted.
mm,
How does that enter the diagnosis of anxiety or procrastination? So, because that's invisible,
mm,
not asked, that upsets me
mm. And perpetuate suffering.
and perpetuates suffering. And that person thinks I got it. That person then thinks I have an anxiety problem.
Mm.
I
And
think, do you
something's
worry
wrong.
about your child being born and you're pregnant? Yeah. Like, oh, why are we talking about that? Because that's maybe a big part of what you're calling anxiety.
Mm.
But I had an anxiety problem. Oh, I see. This is my culture. This is my background. This is who I am. These are the things I want to speak about. This is how I want to care about my sisters who are pregnant. Life then comes out of that understanding as opposed to a therapeutic intervention.
Mm. That's life comes out.
Yeah,
You look at it with these glasses on, life comes out.
yeah. Then the person's going to go do something that's really
Mm.
meaningful and
Mm.
not just try to heal themselves. Healing ourselves is great. Obviously, I'm into that.
Yeah.
But I think a healed person is not just a person who feels better inside, is a person who's living the life that belongs to them.
Mm. Agency.
Yeah.
Mm.
And you doing you. And if
Mm.
doing podcasts and interviewing people and being turned on and passionate about social justice and you're coming for healing, I want to make sure you're doing more of that the way you would do it, not just feeling okay. I want you to be
Yeah.
Cassandra when you're
Yeah.
healed, not David,
Mm.
somebody
Mm.
else or some normalized human being that says, I'm not nervous. My
Mm.
nervous system is okay. I want your nervous system to be okay, as long as it leads you to be more like this.
Mm.
Not just so you can have a nervous system okay by itself. That doesn't really matter to me very much, I gotta say. I
Mm.
shouldn't say that because people would be upset with me. But I think if you have that and it leads you to be more Cassandra, right on.
Mm. Mm.
But that to me, the key is do you become more you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a gift. Yeah, giving people is like, I mean, birthright. I think you talk about it in in the Unshaming way quite a bit. The birthright of becoming yourself, really.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
that's the life project. The life
Mm.
project. How do I become more David and then do that means his calling, his purpose, the way he loves, the way he would raise a child, the way he would love a person, all those, the way he would garden,
Mm.
all those things.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank
You,
you.
you're all doing some amazing stuff.